on the other side. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and anybody joining us on YouTube. This is the Performance and Finance Scrutiny Committee meeting for Wednesday, the 4th of December. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We haven't received any apologies.
Thank you. Next item is the minutes from the previous meeting. Are we happy to confirm and sign those minutes? Agreed. Okay. Item number 3. Any declarations of interest? Okay, so no declaration of interest. We have no public questions. So that takes us straight on to item 5, the half-year performance update. I understand that both the officers were unable to make this meeting because of the rescheduled date. And I think Councillor Rise is going to present the paper.
Thank you, Chair. This was the last minute request of me, and this would normally be presented by the leader. This is the mid-year performance report, which sets out the delivery against the annual plan for the first 6 months of the current financial year. Due to various elections and subsequent PEPs resulting in rescheduled committees, you will be aware that this was considered at executive yesterday. And as when I presented this report yesterday at the executive, I did make clear that this was not the usual course of action and was not how we would have intended. However, any comments or observations tonight will be considered. As I said yesterday, this is the first annual plan set under the new council strategy of 2024 to 2028. The key headlines are the following: that 87% of objectives and projects are assessed as complete or on track, which is an improvement on last year, which was 80% at this time. Any ambers will be progressed through to completion by year end. In a change to the current KPI, there are 2 changes which have been proposed by officers and were approved at yesterday's executive. This is to ensure they remain relevant and achievable. They relate to amending the target for the number of days taken to process new housing benefit claims from 20 days to 25 days, and reducing the target for household waste recycled and composted from 63% to 61%. I would be happy to take any questions, and officers as well present will be able to answer questions as well on detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rise. What I would just like to say before we open up to questions is, if you can possibly, if you have a question, give the page it specifically relates to, whether that's the page within the documents or the page within that that paper. That would be really helpful, because there's a lot of information, and at least we can narrow it down as well. Okay, that being said, open for questions. I think we have Councillor Rowlands first, and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we start on the one that's just been mentioned? That's 1.8 on page 4, about the allowing extra time for dealing with those in serious housing needs. I feel that these are quite really desperate people in many ways. And I wonder why we're pushing back the time that we're making available to deal with urgent cases like this, what the real justification for it is.
Yeah, I think Mr. Watson.
I can take that one because I did
address.
So just bear with me 1 second. The reason the change from the 20 to 25 days, I think, is what Councillor Rowland is asking. That was primarily so that because there have been changes in national benefits regimes, which mean that the remaining claims left with Surrey Heath to determine tend to be more complex, which require us to be able to. Essentially, it takes a little bit longer to be able to handle them. So that's why there is the recommendation to move from 20 to 25 days, because of the complex nature of those cases. The vast majority, I believe, would still... The aim is to achieve them as quickly as possible, but there we do have to set ourselves a target to be measured against, and the 25 days is still well within the DWP's target of 30 days. So we're still 5 days below that target that's set up by the government department. I do apologise if that's not the point you were.
I've also can see that Mr. Watson has got his hand up, so I'm assuming that's for this one as well.
If it is that change to 25 days, Councillor Rise has got it spot on. It's the fact that DWP and the change have taken all the ones that are quick to do, leaving us with all the ones that are hard to do. We still had them before, but we could bring our average down by a mixture of the quick wins versus the long time ones. We now have been left with the ones that take longer time, so our average processing time has got longer. But as you say, we're still within the DWP target, and actually our DWP contact has recommended that we are very good in delivering what we do. So it's quite positive. But obviously we will try and do them as fast as we can. But it's that fine line between putting as many staff in as you can and paying for it versus delivering an effective service.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Did you want to come back, Councillor Rowlands?
Thank you. You hear horrific stories about, and these are obviously very needy families, about families not going without food on particular days, etc. And one wonders that it's another 5 days, which on a family with very limited budgets could be quite worrying. Now, in our borough, perhaps we haven't got the major problems of other larger urban areas, but there's always a question. There are clearly some at the moment, and perhaps the situation will worsen.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens, you said you'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Rowlands. I think the first thing to point out is that we were performing very highly. The KPI of 20 days was being achieved. The DWP have changed the processes, as Mr. Watson said and Councillor Rice said, so we're left with the more challenging cases that are more protracted and do take a lot longer. But the general onus of the team is to deal with these as quickly as they possibly can. Nobody in this local authority wants to do a bad job or to slow down the workload. They do what they can within the resources that we've got, and they do a very good job. We are fortunate we don't have as many people in financial difficulty as other boroughs, as you suggest, but we still do, and we want to make sure they get the best service possible. So 25 days is still within the 30 that DWP think is acceptable, and I'm certain our officers will do their absolute best to make sure that we are well in excess or well below 25 days on that as an average.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. One point and then one question. So on this issue that Councillor Rowlands has raised, I raised it on the 15th of November 2023 at this committee when we were looking at the mid-year update of that financial year. And I agree with the proposal to change the targets, because there's no point in having a target if it's not achievable. And smart targets are achievable, and I definitely understand that the teams will all strive for excellence regardless of the target. They want to meet it and exceed it by as much as possible. And it was 1 hour 56 into the recording of the meeting on the 15th of November 2023 when I got the answer about that, and I'm glad that the targets are now changing, because they weren't being met last year because they weren't achievable for both of these targets. So that's just one point. My question is from page 19 of the full agenda pack, and it is about the progress on the playground replacement at Whitmore Road in Bagshot. I was wondering if there could be an update for the public on that progress. Thank you.
If I could just pass to Ms McCubbin, because she has the accurate language.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, the legal negotiation has concluded. We're at the stage where County Council has gone out to a public advert because of the length of the lease that we're entering into, which is 125 years. It's essentially a land disposal. So in order for them to comply with the Local Government Act, they have to advertise that as a land disposal. The advert is currently out. It went out on the 27th of November. It will finish on the 11th of December, at which point the completion of the lease can take place.
Can I just ask a question off the back of that, actually, and if you want to come back? And I think Mr. Wilson wanted to Watson wanted to talk as well, but reference that point, the playground is part of that money from UK Prosperity, and if it's not, brilliant, that's good, because the March deadline worried me a bit. Okay, cool. Back to Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I know this is already in hand, but I was just wondering about the critical path of the project. Is there anything else that can be done before the 11th of December?
What has been done is we have gone out as part of a larger tender process. So we have got a tender response back for the value of the money that we know that we're going to be receiving, so that everything is lined up as quickly as possible. After the consultation period with councillors on the preferred playground, then we'll be in a position to place the order straight away.
That's great, thank you, because it's really important to people in Bagshot, and it'd be great if we could get it open before the Easter holidays, because the M3 footbridge won't be in place then, so that will lead to more older children who could be using this playground walking over to Lightwater Country Park, and if we could avoid that, them having to cross over at the motorway roundabout, that would be great. But also there is the point about Surrey County Council dragging their feet on this. It's been going since 2022. So it's going to be the best part of 3 years just to refurbish a almost derelict playground. So I think my residents are worried that Surrey County Council's cut something in for them. They're closing the recycling centre, they're closing the family support programme. So it'd be good to get this operational. Thank you.
Thank you. I know this is something that Councillor White has certainly mentioned in the Chamber along with Councillor Wilson for a number of times, so it's good to see that this is actually moving forward. Mr. Watson, did you want to come back to the housing benefit? I saw your hand was up, then it went down.
Indeed, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say that if councillors are approached by residents who are suffering severe hardship, please contact our benefits team and we'll see what we can do. Otherwise, if they are not wanting to contact us, please contact Citizens Advice, who will then signpost them to us or signpost us to them. So, you know, if someone is in real hardship, please let us know and we can do what we can to fast track it. I don't particularly want to open the floodgates to everybody being fast tracked, but if there's real hardship cases, the last thing we want is people suffering.
Councillor Rice, do you want to come back as well?
Thank you. Just on the Whitmore Road Park, I just do want to give Councillor Wilson and the Councillor White and Councillor Gordon reassurance that Surrey Borough Council is absolutely committed to delivering the park in Whitmore Road. It's a priority for us. Officers are in regular contact with the County Council of driving this forward. So we won't if there is County Council dragging their feet, we will hold them, we as the officer team will hold them to account on the commitments that they have made with regards to this. And I hope we can deliver it as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Mountbatten first and then Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Page number 39, it's to do with Surrey Museum. Now, the target we have, annual target seems to be 6,500, but if you look at the 23-24 figure, that adds up to about 9,700 people. So why is the target low? That's a question I have. I've got a couple of more, but if you can start with that, that'll be great.
So that's page 39. It's the people reached by the Heritage Service. Yeah. So the 23-24 figures add up to 9,788, because I worked that out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the target is 6,500. So is there a reason for that?
If I may, I think that's a very good point, Councillor Mountbatten. I think the answer is I'm not entirely sure. I will take that away to discuss with officers. I think our target should be based on previous performance, so I would agree with you that if last year we did well in terms of well exceeding 6,500, I would. I've just, as you probably saw me whispering to my officer there, I'll take that away and I'll actually get an answer for you, Councillor Maragan, on that one. Yeah, apologies for that one.
Thank you. Can I? Oh, one more. I'm trying to correlate my yesterday's paper to the new one which I got just now. It's on page 49 of the big page, which is page 55 in this pack. It's on the forecast. I mean, we look at the number of people parking. Higher the better, so on and so forth. I mean, because we know what the half-year parking numbers are, would it be prudent to look at that again, rather than sort of setting a bigger number and trying to sort of have a variance which is going to be huge? It's something which the exec could have a look at it with the officers. A suggestion.
Can you just confirm the page, Councillor?
It's page number 55 in the PNF pack, yeah, or 79 in the exec pack. So it's what I'm actually trying to drive here is that the figures very clearly the footfall has flattened or wherever it was. Would it be better to redo this forecast? Was my question. If not, if you guys are happy with it, I'm happy with it. It's a suggestion for you all to revisit this. On the target side, please.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Councillor Malvagan, and thank you, Chair. So this is page 55, isn't it? So the number of people parking events compared to 2019 as a baseline. So the target is 90% for this current year. Quarter 1 and Quarter 2 data indicate that we have 90.6% and 90.5%, although the Quarter 1 data has been modified because we had some missing ANPR data, so it's been adjusted. We are achieving the target. So as a consequence, I wouldn't want us to reduce that mid-year. Clearly, we'll look at a full year set of data, or as best as we can, so when we start to model Quarter 3 and perhaps Quarter 4, we could then take an informed view. But at this point in time, if we're achieving the target, even if it is by only 0.5%, arguably perhaps we should be shifting it the opposite way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baggerham. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. I just lost my place. It was page 41 in the old pack. It's page 43 in this pack, the Home Safe Plus scheme. It talks about Frimley Park and Farnham hospitals. Doesn't mention St Peter's. So the 6 villages possibly aren't being touched by this. Although it does say the service is successfully embedded in North West Surrey. I'm not sure whether that refers to Heartlands or not. So I just wonder what the proposals are for the people in the villages in reaching Home Safe.
Sorry, I'm having trouble here because I've obviously got a printed copy and whatever page numbers I'm being told don't tie up. So 43.
It's 43 in the paper pack that we've had today. It was page 41 in the original pack that we looked at the chair's briefing.
Yeah. Page 43 in the top, that's 37 and 73. So you need to go.
Sorry, guys. I'm having a problem with ModGov, so I went for a printed copy, and that's also causing me problems as well. Okay, right. So, Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Thank you, Chair. This doesn't relate to Surrey Heartlands. Home Safe Plus is well embedded within Surrey Heartlands. It is well instilled, and ultimately they have 10 times more referrals than we do through their system because it's been there for a longer period of time. And it's well utilised and well regarded. It's been recently introduced into the Frimley system, which is why this KPI refers to the Frimley system or relates to the Frimley system predominantly, because we want to replicate what they've already got within Heartlands here.
Thank you. Right. Oh, did you catch that? I think it was Councillor Kang, then it was Councillor Quinn, and then Councillor Wilson. But before, because I'm going to do Chair's prerogative as we're on this page, I just wanted to pick up on the handy person service referrals. There's an annual target of 235. This year we've done 74 and 58, but I don't know how that compares to last year. I know it's not heavily promoted, but I know it's a service that probably could be really helpful for residents that are leaving hospital, etc., etc. Is there a limit because of there's one person doing it, it's a handy man rather than a handy person service. And what is the limiting factor on this? Is that the reason why it's not promoted, and is it not being used to its best ability?
Thank you, Chair. It is a handy person service, but as you say, the capacity that it has is very limited, and that's why we don't promote it more widely, because it's already up to capacity, if not beyond. So it is in high demand. Clearly, if we wanted to increase capacity, there would be an increase in cost, and that's not something I think we could contemplate at this point in time.
No, thank you. Right, so Councillor Nurmal-Kang first.
Page 25 of the current one. There seems to be a drastic reduction in the appeals. Is this a one-off, like where obviously it's been 8 of the 9 appeals have been allowed by the inspectorate? Does the planning officers need to realign themselves with current or future? Do you think this trend will carry on, or is it just a blip?
I would suggest, because this is a conversation because things aren't as bad as the figures make out, to be fair, but I can see that Mr. Shinai is there, so I'll leave it to him.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Cam, for your question. I think, as explained at the last PNF meeting, we are reviewing all refusals going forwards. We have had a number of years before where we've done very well on appeals. It seems to me that a lot of the appeals coming through the planning inspectorate are being very permissible in terms of their approach, and quite sort of less robust than officers are in terms of refusing the applications. We have to review that. We did agree at the last meeting whether or not we would invite the planning inspectorate to a meeting to understand how they make their decisions on the cases. And it's a bit of training for the team as well. And we're going through a process to review all our appeals. And as agreed at the PNF meeting, we're going to be bringing a presentation to members of planning committee, the updated appeal stats, and also where we are on the appeal decisions. And this will be a bit of learning for members as well as a whole. It's a bit of an ongoing piece of work that we're doing. We're hoping it will be a blip, and we'll hopefully improve our appeal stats going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think Councillor Quinn was the next one.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to participate in this item on the agenda. My question relates to page 13 of the full pack, target reference 3.0. It mentions improving litter facilities in the borough by replacing old wooden bins. But the target doesn't mention that this obviously only concerns Surrey Heath-owned land and not land, for example, owned by housing associations. So in my ward, in the Avenue Susie, Surrey Avenue estate, there are a number of these old wooden bins that are now belong to Accent that have not been replaced. Have we attempted to try and work with the housing associations at all to convince them to upgrade these bins at the same time, and is there an update on that?
Which one of you? Is that?
I'll take that. Just to give an update on that, when we were going through the procurement process for the bin replacement programme, we did make contact with Accent, with a variety of other stakeholders as well, and they decided not to take part. So, unfortunately, they weren't part of it going forward.
Just out of curiosity, because I got a wonderful relationship with Accent, was there a particular reason why they didn't want to engage?
They had assumed in the approach that we were offering to pay for the bins, when we explained actually we were offering them to join in, so we'd essentially be procuring a lower rate for them, but they would need to pay for the bins. The offer was then declined.
So just for clarity, because we were bulk buying bins, we offered them at a reduced rate. If our residents happen to contact them now asking them to replace the bins, it's going to cost them a lot more money. Okay, thank you. I think Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Noble, then Councillor Wagenham, and then Councillor Rowland. So you get all that. Yeah. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Super short question. This one on page 20 of the full agenda pack, and it's about air quality. So it says that the air quality is improved throughout the borough. I was just wondering to what extent ULEZ in London could have affected and improved the air quality, because PM particulate pollution can travel hundreds of miles, as can NO2 pollution. And if the pollution generated by cars in London is reducing, wouldn't that improve the air quality here as well? Thank you.
Councillor Rice.
I don't have the information to respond to the question with regards to ULEZ. However, I will speak to the Principal Environmental Health Officer to see if that can be taken into account. However, at the most recent meeting of the Licensing Committee, Mr Passion did set out a variety of kind of work that has been taken, and one of the key points that he made is that because of the advancements in kind of automobile technology, has seen a more general reduction in pollution over the period of time, over the 20-year period when the I can't remember the word, but the area that came into place over the 83-1, for example. So I think there are a variety of factors. I would imagine that I would hazard a guess that if there are continual improvements in car efficiency, as well as a greater proportion of electric vehicles on the road, that would then lead to a reduction in particulate matter, which is a negative impact on air quality. But I will take the point away and ask Mr Passion to have a look at that.
Thank you. Councillor Noble, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to page 76 of the pack, page 70 of 73 in the document, underneath 5.1, regards to the customer satisfaction with the contact centre. In my experience, the contact centre has been excellent. I'm just concerned about the last question. How would you rate our overall service? I think there's a danger that if someone has not received the reply they want, they won't necessarily give a good overall rating, but they may have received excellent service. And I just wonder whether we should be more specific in that questioning in order to get an actual outcome for our customer service handling, rather than how people feel about the state of the economy or whatever's happening in the world.
Thank you. Interesting question. Mr Watson, I believe.
Thank you very much, Councillor Noble, and you raise a very valid point around this. It is very difficult in trying to keep people online long enough to answer a survey without them terminating, hence why some of the answers on the last one are drop-offs. As you point out, it's only occasionally those with an axe to grind that will hang on long enough to go through and let us know they're dissatisfied. And it is a difficult way of trying to measure things. I appreciate your comments and thank you very much for the feedback that the team does very well. We're very proud of our ability to triage nearly 90% of our calls at first point of contact. And as you say, once someone gets a satisfactory answer, they do drop off rather than stay on to do a survey. What we are looking at as part of the review and the annual plan going forward is a new customer relationship management system, which we may have the ability to do more in-depth probing of our customers and their satisfaction. So something we're looking at and we are bringing in with the new system that comes through. The current system is becoming end of life right now, so we'll see what the options are with the new systems. But thank you for the feedback.
Thank you. Councillor Milbaggin.
Thank you, Chair. Page 47 of PNF pack. It's on 1.1. It says feasibility study on relocation of Surrey Heath House, etc. And it says complete. I know it would be a confidential document. Would it ever come out to the full council, or would I be able to have a look at it on a confidential basis? I mean, it's a question for the CEO and Morgan Rice.
I will just give my answer. I'm not a member of the Property and Regeneration Working Group, so I haven't seen that document either. However, I do know that has been reviewed by that working group, and I will now pass over to the Interim Chief Executive for a clearer answer.
Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Councillor Melvagan, and thank you, Chair. I'd need to review the documents and see what we could provide. Clearly, there's not things that we would want to put in the public domain because there's commercial sensitivity around there. There are cost projections and other elements, which means that we wouldn't share it more widely. Let me check with the Head of Property and Economic Development, and clearly we'll share amongst this group whatever we possibly can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to Councillor Rowlands, I've actually got something related to page 48, which is the next one down. Without going into any major details, is it really blue, which would suggest it's complete? 1.2 and 1.3.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the time it takes me to read these things. So ultimately, the target is for an options paper to be presented to Executive in March 2024. To the best of my recollection, that did take place. So from our perspective, we do feel that the milestone has been completed.
But it also says project ongoing.
Indeed. So the specific target was for an options paper to be presented, and that has been ticked clearly with asbestos removal and the regeneration work. That's going to take multiple years. So you'll see that there'll be future milestones within subsequent annual plans. So it's not as though we can do everything within one financial year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. Referring to page 28, to the voluntary group that working on community transport, I'm told that it's very much in demand, but they're unable, because of pressure on it, to accommodate wheelchairs. Anybody in a wheelchair, we don't appear to have the facility to be able to help them at the moment. Is that true? So it's likely that some of these people will be bound in wheelchairs, but it's not. At the moment, we can't provide them with transport if they are dependent on a wheelchair.
Mr Stevens.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. Thank you, Chair. That's the first time I've heard that referenced. So if you'll allow me some time just to speak to the Community Services Head to understand that in a bit more detail, or if you can email me to elaborate on the circumstances, I'd be very interested. All of our vehicles they are accessible, so they can accommodate wheelchairs. It could very well be that the number of wheelchair users per vehicle is causing a particular challenge, but that's just supposition at the moment. I'd like an opportunity just to explore that in more detail, if I may.
Just the feedback I had was that some of these volunteers are using their own vehicles. Is that right? I don't know. Or that they're unable to accommodate wheelchairs on the vehicles that are used.
Not necessarily. I don't necessarily have. I think what Councillor Rowlands may be referring to is the various organisations like Camberley Care, like Mitchett Cares, who are an organisation of volunteers that use their own vehicles. That is not. That would not be under the council's responsibility. Those are independent organisations. I do think it potentially raises the questions of is there a conversation that could be had of if the council could support with our vehicles when needed. Essentially, I wonder if that's something we could potentially have a conversation on. But no, those voluntary organisations would not fall under the council's responsibility.
What we're talking about is only our own vehicles operating this service. It isn't a wider community facility. That's correct, is it?
That's correct, Councillor Rowlands.
Yeah.
So we provide community transport through Runnymede as our partner who can provide all of our community services. They are purpose-built minibuses. They are accessible so they can accommodate wheelchairs. We wouldn't utilise personal vehicles. That wouldn't be appropriate for the reasons that you've expressed. But if you can provide more details around the challenges, as Councillor Rice suggested, perhaps we can speak to whichever organisation it is that is having difficulty in accommodating wheelchairs and perhaps work in partnership with them.
While we're on page 34, I was looking at page 35, 4.5. It says it's been delayed. Do we know until when and why? And is that, who would that come under? Yourself again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That would come under me. One of the things that we were waiting for was to understand what the Surrey County Council model would be around demand responsive travel. That's taken a little bit longer to come out of its pilot stage. We're also having conversations with health partners to see whether or not we could support home to hospital or home to surgery transport. That hasn't come to fruition, unfortunately. So whilst we have a lot of aspirations and hopes around how we can expand the service, they are reliant on other partners. And obviously their decision making is outside of our control. So we would like to continue and try and expand the service, but at the moment that is distinctly challenging.
Okay. Thank you. As no one else, okay, I'm going to throw one of mine in first, and I'll go to Councillor Wilson and Councillor Rowlands afterwards. The Meals on Wheels, which I know is obviously really very popular and always quite successful, and this is probably the busiest time of the year. I know we've got the figures to date. Are we geared up for, I'm guessing, the Christmas period? And I don't know how these figures compare to last year. Are they up? Are they down? They're the same?
That's a good question, Chair. Thank you very much. The figures remain largely the same in terms of our meals at home provision. Despite promoting through initiatives such as Home Safe Plus, we see a slight increase, but it's not substantial. The question in relation to seasonal variation, yes, we do see a small seasonal variation, but it is within the capacity of the service to be able to accommodate.
And have we had to increase prices because of costing increases with food and services, etc.? Because obviously the people that are taking these are probably quite vulnerable, and if they go up too much, they may not be able to afford the meals. So how do we stand with that?
We were fortunate for this financial year to be able to receive additional grant funding through our health colleagues, which has helped to subsidise the cost of the meals. There has been a perpetual challenge in relation to the cost of the meals and the cost of providing those meals, including the reheating and then distribution. Inevitably, because those costs have escalated, we are going to have to look at the costs for the next financial year, but clearly we're mindful of the impact that that will have on service users. That's not to say that all of our service users can't afford the meals that we're providing or won't be able to, but that's clearly a piece of work we need to do to understand the impact that would have on our customer base.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've got Councillor Wilson and Councillor Rowlands, and I will probably draw it to a close, and this is a burning request.
Thank you, Chair. It's page 91 of the full agenda pack. It's in the mid-year indicators section, and it's the right-hand side of that about the family support programme, and it's exceeded the target again, even though the targets have been increased for satisfaction from service users. So despite that, Surrey County Council are planning to close it very soon. And as I was telling the press, this is a false economy because it's going to push other costs onto services like the DWP or GP surgeries. So I was just wondering, has an assessment been made of the cost to this council of Surrey County Council's actions in closing this, and what effect is it going to have on our residents? Thank you.
Mr. Stevens, and actually before you, I actually had a note on this as well. Councillor Wilson, you've asked some of the questions I've got. The other thing I would love to see is not a percentage, but numbers, because percentages look really nice, but actually these are families, so it'd be really helpful to get numbers of families that we have been helping, because it says we're meeting our targets and exceeding our targets, but numbers will be really helpful. And now I'll let you answer.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Chair. I think we're all a little bit flabbergasted about the decision to terminate the family support programme. We are now aware that the Department for Education funding, which was redirected towards the districts and boroughs to provide the FSP service, it's been confirmed that it's no longer going to be, it's not going to be continued effectively. In terms of the costs to the districts and boroughs, we will incur a notional redundancy cost associated with the termination of the family support programme, but the wider costs to us as a district or as a borough and the wider cost to the community, no, we have not quantified those.
Can you just clarify the first point? So the funding, you said, has been withdrawn or not. So where has it been withdrawn from? Has that been withdrawn from county or from main government?
So the Department for Education provide the funding that ultimately funds the family support programme and will do for the remainder of this financial year, but they have confirmed for any subsequent financial year that funding will not be in place. And as a consequence, the county couldn't redirect that towards the districts and boroughs that provide the family support programme, even if they wish to do so. That's not to say they couldn't make the decision to continue to fund the family support programme, because we still have families in need. Yeah. But through conversations with county colleagues, they have said that those families will be directed back to the front door, which is technically called CSPAR, and then referred to a relevant organisation from there.
So there's two takeaways from that. One is it's not just county, by the sounds of things. And CSPAR is already quite busy. So CSPAR, is that a government agency? I can't remember. No, that's the front door for county. Okay, so it's county. So I'm guessing, are they going to get extra funding? Will they get any extra funding or not?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how it works out globally in
Okay.
terms of their budgets for adults and children.
Okay. Right, so I've got Councillor Rowlands, I've got Councillor Noble, and then I will stop. If thank you.
Okay, referring to page 38, and of course it goes on, in fact goes on into the next section as well, support for a strong economy, it comes into that. Haven't we got a crisis as far as the shortage of affordable housing is concerned? We recognise high demand and a lack of affordable homes for many people in this borough. So I just wonder whether we're putting enough energy and hard work into responding to this proven need of a large group of younger people, possibly in their late 20s and 30s, as far as housing is concerned.
Mr. Stevens.
Clearly, it's a corporate priority for us to deliver housing, affordable housing, social housing, and any other accommodation that we possibly can. There are challenges around that, as you'll appreciate, Councillor Rowlands, in terms of having deliverable sites and having partners that are interested in actually building even on our own assets. We have had some recent conversations with Accent as our largest registered provider within the borough. They have expressed an eagerness to build more properties within Surrey Heath, which is reassuring. The conversation that we had last week, they recounted they've got 41 units in the pipeline that are coming forward and are eager to undertake more. So wherever possible, we are having conversations with housing developers, with Homes England, and with anyone, frankly, who'd be interested in developing within the borough to ensure that we can bring forward as much affordable and social provision as we possibly can.
Thank you. So, Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the response and the conversation around page 91 and the family support feedback, in the light of what Mr Stevens has just told us about with the withdrawal of support, I think it's even more important that we know how many families are going to be affected by this withdrawal of support, and is there a plan in place to support those families in some other way?
Thank you, Councillor Noble. The plan to support those families in any other way rests with the County Council. Clearly, our responsibility was to deliver the family support programme, and as the stats show, we did an incredibly good job of doing that, and that's something that as a borough we are very, very proud of. We have some outstanding officers that unfortunately, unless we can redeploy them, we will lose. But this is very much a county council responsibility, and that's not us wishing to turn our back on those families and not support them. It's just that the obligation rests with the county council. And as much as we want to perhaps replicate family support, quite honestly, that wouldn't be our remit, and we wouldn't have the finances to be able to do that.
Thank you. I actually have got one more question, which I was going to ask. It's page 36, 4.7, support those in greatest need. Reference to DFG budget. Have we had any further updates from the government as to what the funding model is going to look like, and if not, when are we likely to know?
Good question, Chair. I'm not entirely sure, so if you'll allow me to go away, I will confirm back to the committee.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to call that there. We've had some good questioning there. So any notes that we've had will be fed back to the executive to go in with the, obviously, discussion last night. And we now go on to the next item, which is climate change. Is that going to be yourself, Councillor Rice? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will take, there's two reports this evening, I will take them individually. However, they are closely related. So the Scope 3 emissions report. So most of the Council's work to reduce emissions has been focused on our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which mostly comes from the electricity and gas use in our buildings and the fuel for our fleet. These are emissions that the Council has the ability to influence. However, less has been said about our Scope 3 emissions, which account for 98% of all Council emissions. These are outside of the direct control of the Council and are not produced by the organisation, sorry, the Borough Council, or assets that it controls. There are many categories of Scope 3 emissions, as shown in the table that's in the report. However, there are three main sources which account for 97% of all Scope 1 to 3 emissions. These are procurement, investment, and leased assets. Across these emission sources, there is a relatively small amount of the emissions that the Council can target to reduce. Perhaps the best opportunity is around our waste procurement, for which a new contract will be operational from 2027. The current waste fleet produce around 700, I never get that one, I think it's 700 tonnes of CO2 emissions per annum, and so pushing for clear timelines on to decarbonise these assets can produce large emissions and even cost savings. Further, these are there is a much larger number of emissions that come from waste processing, and so discussion around the amount of waste and how it will be treated should be part of these discussions as well. More widely, officers are considering the sustainability of every procurement that is made. The biggest difficulty here is an often lack of data that allows for easy measurement of the carbon footprint of a product and a lack of affordable or sustainable alternatives. The Council also has the ability to lobby the Surrey Pension Fund to decarbonise its investments. There have been many examples of organisations, including councils, that have achieved this and still delivered returns for members. The difficulty here is that Surrey Heath Borough Council only accounts for less than 2% of the Surrey Pension Fund, and so would have to work to convince many other organisations that decarbonisation was the correct course of action. And hopefully, with the authorities that are members, for example, the other authorities that are local government in Surrey, they should all be on board with these targets as well. In terms of the Council's leased assets, there is plenty of work that can be done across our large portfolio. However, any action is likely to come at a great cost. The biggest issue is that we have very limited information of emissions, required works, and the cost of works. There are complications around who should deliver the works, for example, the owner, which is Surrey Heath Borough Council, or the tenant who will receive the benefit of the reduced energy usage on site. Of the other 5 sources of emissions, 2 of these are decreasing well-to-tank and transmission and distribution emissions, as they are directly linked to our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, which should see significant reductions over the next few years. Meanwhile, commuting, home working and business travel are likely to stay at higher levels. Ultimately, tackling our Scope 3 emissions is going to be a long process. The UK government has pledged that the economy will be net zero by 2050. And if we are to better that target, then significant energy and resources will have to be targeted towards this goal. Given how long it will take to see significant emission reductions, we can say that it will be near impossible to reduce Scope 3 emissions to anywhere near zero by 2030. However, that does not mean that we are not committed to driving efficiency and securing carbon efficiency as much as possible in that point. And I'm happy to take any questions on the report. I also do have online Cameron Dent, who is the Climate Change Manager for Surrey Heath, and Sue McCubbin, who is the Interim Head of Environment and Leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. And before I open up for questions, I'd like to thank Councillor Rise and Cameron Dent as well for his very clear report. He actually told me he wanted to reduce it. I said, no, it's perfectly fine as it is, and I could actually understand it. And there's lots of questions I've got, which as well, but hopefully we've got some other questions as well. So we've got Councillor Nurmulkang first, then Councillor Wilson.
I just wanted to declare actually a non-pecuniary interest. I actually sit on the Pension Fund Committee at Surrey County Council.
Thank you. Did you have a question, or that was okay. Councillor Wilson?
And thank you for the report. I echo what the Chair just said about it. This is quite a small question, really. It's on page 111, and it's about commuting emissions. And it seems to be just officer commuting emissions, not councillors. Is that right? And do you know there's a consultation open by the government at the moment about holding meetings fully remotely and allowing for more things like proxy votes and things like that? So that could really reduce the amount of travel that councillors have to do to get to meetings, and it would also reduce the costs of having the carbon cost of having a room like this, and you know how many lights it's got, because we realise when they're not on or not all on. So there's probably about 50 lights in this room, and there's all the cost of heating and maintaining the space and all the rest of it. Would you like to encourage councillors to fill in the consultation and promote fully remote meetings and hybrid meetings for everything and for decisions? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, that figure only includes officer commuting, so it doesn't include us, the councillors of the authority. I would agree with you. I think further use of hybrid working has the opportunity to reduce potential commuting emissions. However, what we have found, because of the flexible working scheme that we have here at Surrey Heath, that has actually been able to attract candidates that would come from a wider geographical area. So while we have the added benefit of a better pool of potential candidates, what that does mean is when they do then come into the office, they are commuting over a further distance. They're not coming in they wouldn't be coming in every day. So it is a balancing act, I do agree. And I think that's one of a key part of tackling Scope 3 emissions is how can we as an authority and how we as an employer can seek to promote carbon efficiency and carbon neutral travelling. There are a number of programmes that we have, but there's something that we cannot directly control, and I think that's so it's being very clear within the report is because it is a Scope 3 emission, we can't directly control, and there are a number of then wider schemes that the government are pursuing. For example, the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles from 2030. There are a number of things, so it is understanding how we can kind of tackle that. Sorry, I rambled there. I do apologise.
No problem. Thank you. I'm just going to pick up on the point, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Wilson. So I had exactly the same question about councillors, because obviously it clearly speaks about staff. I did, on page 111, notice the last paragraph: to encourage the uptake of EVs, the council should look at installing further EV charging facilities in the office car park. My question is that what the staff actually want? Because there's no point in installing them if the staff aren't going to use EV cars. Speaking from experience, whilst I appreciate that the government is trying to push us in the direction of an EV, having looked at EV cars and the insurance for an EV car, currently, to have one is more expensive than not having one. So that is not exactly an incentive. Before we invest money in doing something, is that what the staff actually want?
That's a very good point, Councillor Garrett, thank you. I would agree that the demand to bringing EV chargers within the council car park should be guided by what the primary users of that car park would need. I would say, so we wouldn't, if we were to look at providing EV charging points within the council car park, that would be based on a required need. I also think based on the potential sale of land east of Knoll Road, would a capital investment into EV charging points within a council car park, which potentially could then be ripped out to be built on, is that a wise investment? So that would be parts of the initial analysis. What I do think is needed is to make sure that across the borough we are providing the infrastructure for EV charging. And that's not just the responsibility of Surrey Heath Borough Council, that's a county council responsibility. It's also a national priority as well, I imagine. So it's ensuring that how we as Surrey Heath Borough Council can maximise the assets that we have. For example, providing more in the town centre car park where there is a fast charging which people can use when they need to. So thank you for your point.
Councillor Wilson, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for the answer. I won't go through the question again, but basically the point of councillors holding meetings remotely, saving 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent generated by a councillor is the same as saving 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent generated by commuting officers. But if we weren't here and we were holding this meeting completely remotely, then the officers wouldn't need to be here either, which is, a small contribution.
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a good point. I think that will have to be considered as to what the government promotes with changes to the existing legislation, and also with their proposed local government reorganisation white paper that's due to come out later this month, of what is the future for local government, what is the future for public bodies, how do they work? I mean, for example, a Scope 1 emission, I think a Scope 2 emission would be the use of this room. If we were all online for this meeting, we would actually be reducing our carbon emissions by not having to heat and light this room. I think there has to always be a balance of how we approach it. By moving to, for example, fully hybrid meetings, how would that impact this committee operating? How would it impact this? How would it impact resident engagement with the council if everything was online? I think that's a discussion we've been having recently within the governance working group as well. So I think there has to be a balance, but as always, promoting carbon efficiency is something that we should always be doing.
And of course, that does mean that the council then start paying for my electricity when I'm sitting at home with my lights on and my laptop on, of course. Have a conversation.
That is then potentially then moving those emissions into Scope 3. It's potentially moving from a Scope 1 or 2 into a Scope 3. So
I was being playful.
This is the complex nature of how we are monitoring through the Scope 1 to 3 emissions. Is moving it somewhere doesn't necessarily reduce it, or can just move it into a different column.
I have got a question. I'll come to you in a second. So, looking at the paper, obviously one of the key areas, without a shadow of a doubt, is waste. And from what I can see, it's not necessarily just the vehicles. In fact, it's the waste itself that's the biggest problem. Obviously, the vehicles and the fact we're using diesel and they're having to repair the diesel vehicles, and there's a cost to replace the EVs. That's all one thing, but I get the impression, looking at the figures, that actually that's a very small percentage. So the bit that's the biggest figure, which we're going to have the biggest problem, is actually how we dispose of the waste, what's done with it, where it's done. Do we actually have any control over that? I mean, the site isn't run by us, is it? So that's done by another organisation. So how does that piece, because that is the biggest number within these figures, and it seems like it's the one where we've got the least control.
You're right that it's a level of least control at the moment. There are periods of time when you do get the ability to have control. For example, with the re-procurement process, we have the ability to then set specifications. So that would be the time when we would be able to make strides forward. However, what I don't believe is going to be possible in the 27 set of work that we're going to be doing is that we're going to be able to, we won't be able to achieve net zero, and I would say it will be difficult to get near net zero. I am just going to ask Mr. Dent to come in just with regard to the question on the split between those figures I don't have.
Over to you, Mr. Dent.
Hi there, thank you for that. So just to confirm, I believe the question there is on the split between where the emissions lie. So the waste fleet produces around 700 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per annum, and yet our actual waste figure is more than 20,000. So you are correct that it's a very small percentage in that. And just to follow up on what Councillor Rise was saying, we have very limited ability to sort of impact the processing of that waste. That is a statutory role that's held by county council, and lots of our role there is to encourage recycling, so that more of our waste doesn't have to be incinerated, because we don't use landfill. So that's where most of our household waste goes, unless it can be recycled. But yeah. Being able to engage in the contract process may be able to help us with new providers that are looking to sort of influence our residents in that way.
And actually picking up on that point, although it is 700, whatever that, what is it?
700 tons of
carbon dioxide per year, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The cost of replacing the fleet, monetary terms, is very, very high, yes?
Yes, that will be. Sorry, that will be a significant capital expenditure, no matter what option is decided on. There will and the existing fleet that we have. I know that the existing fleet that we have is coming to the end of its life. So the new in 2027, with the new system in place, it will be likely that we will have to do almost brand new procurement of vehicles. So there is an opportunity there to deliver efficiency, because they will be newer vehicles, but we will also have to balance that against the value of. I always get this. It's essentially the best cost as well for residents.
Councillor Newman-Kang.
You've gone ahead of me. You've asked a question similar to what I was going to ask, but on that point, second paragraph on page 103. Obviously, we can't control what's put into waste, and waste is actually the highest contributor to emissions. And I just wanted to see, is there any directive that sort of taxing plastic products that don't contain more than 30%? Is there any work being done on that?
So that's not necessarily that's within our power as the Waste Collection Authority. That's very much a national government issue with regards to how they are looking at any of those schemes. There are changes that are coming in. I believe it's the extended producer responsibility, which places more emphasis on the producer of the waste to reduce and recycle, and so it's catching it upstream rather than it being right at the end. So that is going to be that's something that's coming in within, I think, the next year or two, or so that is a scheme that's coming into place. With regards to a plastic tax, that would be a national government issue, which I'm not going to comment on.
Yeah, all I was going to say from experience in my day job, I know for a fact that we use products, we have to use plastic, and the manufacturer gets taxed on it, but they are in a completely different area to what we are, so we wouldn't get any of the funding from that, unless I'm... Oh, okay, over to you, Mr. Zeeb.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very good question. So Councillor Rise is right. There's extended producer responsibility, or EPR, because it's less wordy, where effectively the producers are taxed for producing or manufacturing plastics. That money does actually get fed back into the districts and boroughs as waste collection authorities. So we have a confirmation of the funding for next financial year, which we're currently rationalising because it only landed at the start of this week. That is intended to be ring-fenced towards the cost of us managing waste, and obviously reducing residual waste and increasing recyclate, because that's where we can control the carbon dioxide generation. The waste that we produce as a borough, like many across Surrey and beyond, goes to energy for waste. So effectively it gets incinerated. The waste disposal authorities were encouraged to do that many, many years ago as an alternative to landfill because there was a landfill tax introduced at the time. Now there is going to be an emissions trading scheme charge for waste disposal authorities such as Surrey County Council, and they estimate the cost of incineration based on the current rates of residual waste will be around about £9 million per year to the county. So clearly that is the government's push to encourage us to do something other than incineration. And really that does come down to waste minimisation and recycling as much as we possibly can.
Just to add on to that, it's, I think as Mr Stevens just said, where within the Borough Council's kind of area of influence is promoting recycling. So that's a key priority in being able to drive down waste. However, what I would point is that we already have very good rates of recycling in Surrey Heath. Last year we were 8th nationally, and if we hit the targets that we as in the last report, it was a slight reduction. But if we were to hit that 61%, that would be us in the top 3 of the waste collection authorities in the country. So, as we can see, we're already we have, as Mr Dent said, we have over 20,000 tonnes of carbon produced by waste. So even if everyone recycled everything, it would be unlikely that we would be so. The areas that we do have the ability to influence is important, but it's never going to answer. So it has to be partnership working with the County Council as the waste disposal authority, with the national government, of finding ways to have more recycling and cutting out the waste earlier as much as possible.
Thank you. I'm going to throw my question in, and then I'm going to come to you, Councillor Wilson, and I think we'll probably have to, because we've got another paper as well, haven't we? So my question relates to page 109, second paragraph, halfway down. Finally, digital meters can be attached to assets which will report the energy use in real time for a site, meaning no extra work for officers. However, this comes at a cost of £299 per annum per site, which would cost £87,000 per annum. So my question is, why is there a per annum cost on a meter? Do we have to rent the meter? Because I've got a smart meter in my house. It doesn't cost me anything, and I can regularly get figures from it, and I've got a smart app on my phone that tells exactly what I'm using. So I'm just interested to see why there's an annual cost.
I will just ask Mr Dent to answer this question.
Mr Dent, I think that's over to you.
Hi there. Yes, so in effect, it's the software cost mainly that the provider charges. So it's a cover-all fee that they have for installation and for the back-end software that we would get to use. And it's just their business model and their way of ensuring that they get an annual payout from the operations in effect.
I'm in the wrong business. Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to the previous point about borough councils being responsible for increasing recycling rates, but the cost falling on the county council. At the last cabinet meeting of the county council, the leader of Surrey County Council mentioned that he wanted Surrey Heath to increase its recycling rate, even though it's already very high. And he did that literally at the same time as they were shutting down a recycling centre. So have you got any comment on what the leader said there? Thanks.
I think decisions to close down recycling centres is a bad idea. However, Surrey County Council has its own pressures that it has to respond to. Whether I think that's the right decision, I would disagree. I think, and I'm trying to choose my words carefully because of discussions I've been having with County Council recently. What I would say is improving recycling is a job that we all need to encourage. And I think as the Waste Disposal Authority, the County Council should work more in partnership with the boroughs and districts as the Waste Collections Authority. However, it does highlight, to me, a flaw within how local government works, of one authority is responsible for collecting waste and one authority is then responsible for disposing of that waste. It does strike me as a system that was designed 50 years ago, and I think, I hope that the white paper that the government is producing later in this month has some way of addressing that. What I would say to the County Council is that they should always look to what is best for residents. However, I am also acutely aware of decisions that we are having to take as Surrey Heath Borough Council, which residents may also disagree with. However, as I was a supporter of Councillor Wilson's petition to keep Swift Lane Recycling Centre open, I think keeping recycling centres open is good. I do have concerns of the impact that the closure before Christmas will have on potential fly tipping, which, as a borough council, we are responsible for. We bear the financial responsibility for. I think better partnership working between the waste collection authorities and the waste disposal authorities is only for the betterment of our residents, and I would encourage that.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to move that on because we've got the next paper and then we've obviously got another one after that. So thank you very much. Oh, it's you again, Councillor Rice, isn't it? So thank you for that so far. And over to you for the defining of Surrey Heath Council net zero targets.
Thank you, Chair. This does essentially follow on from the report that we've just been discussing. So in 2019, just for a bit of background, Surrey Heath Borough Council declared a climate emergency. Currently, this public pledge has two key aims. Number one, to work towards achieving the ambitious net zero carbon emission target by 2030 as an organisation, and contribute to making the borough net zero by 2050 with the aspiration for net zero by 2030. Number two, to ensure that the council as an organisation is resilient to the impacts of climate change and support the resilience of the borough to the impacts of climate change. While the pledge is only 5 years old, our knowledge and understanding of carbon accounting and emissions reduction has increased greatly over this period, as seen in the previous report. In addition, the current wording lacks clarity over which emissions should be included. As such, it's become apparent that our current goals need to be amended to be clearer. And I take this with a pinch of humility as one of the introducers of this motion 5 years ago. Specifically, the wording within the first aim needs to be clarified. The current target, this currently targets reaching net zero carbon emissions as an organisation by 2030. Yet we have not defined what emissions fall within the boundary of the organisation and therefore what emissions we are measuring. Therefore, our current pledge of being net zero as an organisation by 2030 most strongly aligns with scopes 1 and 2, as we have high levels of control over these emissions and we can directly reduce them through our operations. However, all our Scope 3 emissions are directly created by other groups and not the council, meaning we have limited control over them. Reaching net zero across Scope 3 by 2030 is impossible, as I've already set out, without significant offsetting, valued at a significant amount per annum, according to the method used by the London Plan. Following discussions, meetings of the Net Zero Environment and Leisure Working Group, and given the above, is suggested as a recommendation to Executive, which I'm coming to you first, that the following definitions are used for future climate targets. Number one, aim for net zero emissions across Scope 1 and Scope 2, the electricity, gas and fuel the council directly uses by 2030. Aim for net zero emissions across Scope 3, so the council's indirect emissions up and down our value chain, including procurement, by 2045, with the aspiration for 2040. Ensure that both the council as an organisation and the borough as a whole are resilient to the impacts of climate change. For clarity, this does not mean that the council will be deprioritising Scope 3 emissions. Given a tonne of carbon removed from the atmosphere has the same impact regardless of how it is accounted for, it is suggested that all projects are chosen based on cost and the size of carbon reductions achieved. For example, the recent decision to provide PV panels on the Camberley Square Mall roof would be and the installation of solar panels at Places Leisure. That second one would be a reduction in Scope 3 emissions. And I will leave it there. I'm happy to answer questions, but I do just want to stress, yes, this is a movement of targets that the council has previously set. I think when we declared the climate emergency, Councillor Marvagnan will remember as well with Councillor Garrett, this was a decision that was taken on, I think, unanimously by the council, and since then a significant work has been taken. But what has been clear in that preceding 5 years is that the 2030 target for Scope 3 we can't meet. And I think, based on earlier discussions with regards to targets that should be achievable, that's what I've wanted to bring forward here. So a target that we have that we can actually work to, that is still actually setting a ambitious target with the aspiration for 2040 for Scope 3, that will actually require a significant amount of work by this council. So I just want to, and I'll happily answer any questions.
I'm going to do Chair's prerogative, and then I'll come to Councillor Mountbatten and Councillor Wilson. So on point 2, and you alluded to it, we've obviously mentioned in this chamber already achievable targets. Based on what we've just seen in the previous paper, is even the aim for net zero emissions for cross Scope 3 achievable by 2045? Because in view of the fact we've just alluded to the fact that most of that is out of our control, apart from the vehicles, which is actually quite a small percentage, is it an achievable target?
Thank you, Chair. I would say yes. It is a stretch target. I do admit that it's a target that is 2040 is 10 years before the government target for the whole of the country, as well as potentially 5 years of the 2045. So I admit that we are putting ourselves in a potentially harder position to achieve that target. What, based on the advice I have received of officers and the reports, it is achievable, or if not achievable, the vast majority of that Scope 3 is achievable by 2045. Within climate change, kind of adaptation reduction, what is widely seen as the hardest bit is almost like the final bits, the final 10%, the final 15%. So I do believe that by 2045, for example, our waste service will have gone through a whole further procurement, and by that time it is expected that there will have been significant improvements within technology around that as well. So yes, I would say that it is achievable, but it will still require hard work.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Mountbatten and Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, it is the same point I was going to raise, because 2045 seems, like you said, it's a stretch. I would only advise the exec to actually look at it and keep it to the government target of 2050. If we achieve it earlier, then we take the glory. So that's the way I would do it. I mean, putting it at 2045, I mean, it's going to cost us a lot of money. That's a fact. Because if you look at Scope 3 is literally out of our control, most of it. And if whatever we have within our control, it's going to cost money. And which means the central government has to fund us, which I doubt they will do it even in the next 30 years. So it's going to be a problem. So my advice is try and stretch it, well, to 45, stick to 2050. That's my advice. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Just to respond, thank you very much for the advice. I think it's reasonable advice to give. What I still do think that for the Scope 3 emissions, there is a target. That target is achievable. The wider 2050 target, I think, at 2045, if the country is continuing, this is personal opinion only, at 2045 it will be in those final stages of achieving net zero. So I think nationally, my hope is that we're well beyond that. But what I would think is probably a reasonable request, just as almost a compromise, a halfway position, is that the executive at the time, I don't know, maybe in 2035, does a full review of is that 2045 target actually achievable at that point, considering that would be 10 years on from now. We would want to do, we're doing but it's almost set into the policy of at specific periods there are full reviews of the achievability of those targets, and at that time, if it needs to be changed, then I would, not that I expect to be on the council at that point, but I think there is there's definitely a reasonable position to say that the targets should always be achievable. That's the kind of point I would take. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree that it's sensible to redefine these targets, because the Scope 3 targets at the moment is obviously not achievable. But I was wondering, if we change to these targets, would that disincentivise bringing some of the really high emissions creators that are created by procurement at the moment into Scope 1 and 2? If they were brought back in-house, for example, the waste contract, would that mean that we'd have to change these targets again? Because if the waste suddenly became Scope 1 or 2, that would be like 10,000% increase in scope 1 or 2 emissions. But then it might, because as you said, 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent is the same regardless of what scope it comes from. But then that might give the council more control to be able to reduce emissions from, for example, the waste contract. So do we have to be careful we're not disincentivising a potential reduction in emissions?
If we were to bring any service that comes in-house, moves it out of a scope 3 emission into a scope 1 or 2, scope 2 emission. I think someone's car's going off. So what that would actually do is actually our scope 3 emissions would reduce, but obviously then our scope 2 emissions or whatever would then increase. Do I think that it creates kind of an environment of kind of deprioritisation? No. I'm really clear with officers of the expectations that I have with this work of, while we may be moving a target for scope 3, is that when it comes to procurement, we always have to be driving for the most sustainable option. That has to be a part of it as well. What is unrealistic about the current target of 2030 is that current technology and current procurement just means that achieving scope 3 net zero by 2030 is just impossible. So I think we shouldn't essentially tie the hands of officers of trying to deliver impossible work, because the only way that we would be able to achieve net zero and scope 3 emissions would be through carbon offsetting, which is not a route we wish to take due to, it's not actually net zero, it's just figures being moved around, and it's significantly costly, which I don't really want to do, and also the council cannot afford. Bringing it in-house always gives us more control, but I would say with the waste collection service, the way that it works, actually there are very limited periods, and it's normally at the specification stage of a process where you can make the significant amount. That really wouldn't change with a contracted service or an in-house service. At that beginning stage, when you're making the capital specifications, is when you make the significant amounts of progress.
I'm going to pause it there because I'm conscious that we obviously have one more paper which could go on. No, that's fine. So we have to, as a committee, send recommendations or agree. Yeah. Which is, I'm going to suggest we go to page 123 and agree to the recommendations as listed there, and I won't repeat them, as you said last night, but the only amendment may be what you, off the back of what Councillor Bagum said, maybe put in there something that will come back to executive in 2030.
I think I'll take that away to discuss with officers on what would be the most feasible or sensible.
Are we happy? So that's 123, the 3 aims that are the 3 points just said by Councillor Rice. Are we happy to approve that, committee? Agreed. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rice. And thank you, Mr. Dent, for your report. Very, very informative. Okay, so that takes us on to the last item of the evening, which is the consideration of the call-in for Councillor Ward grants. Now, this is a new area for me. I've been on that side before, but I've never been on this side before. So bear with me, because there's a procedure we have to follow. I'm just going to make sure I've got it at the forefront of my... there we go. No, I've got... Right, okay, so... the way it goes, obviously, there was a call-in for the Council Ward Grant Scheme, and I'm going to just find the relevant points. So the call-in reasons were given. There is an unfair disadvantage to councillors who were unaware of the likelihood of reductions, removals. Point 2, it is unfair to organisations who are in the process of making an application. Point 3, a notice period should have been provided. Point 4, savings potential of the grant scheme is very small and insignificant when considering the whole savings target needed. And point 5, the grants represent a vital link between councillors and their communities. The removal of grants undermines the community role of elected members. And point 6, the argument that grants are not spent is contradictory to the argument that the removal of the grants will achieve savings. There was it was called in by Councillor Quinn and Councillor Rodens, and that's a summary of what the reasons for calling were. Basically, the procedure now is the lead councillor, Councillor Finan Cook, gets up to 8 minutes to speak. then the senior manager, which I think in this case is going to be Mr. Stevens, and potentially Mr. Watson, get to speak as well. And then the calling councillors will present their reasons for calling it in, and they get up to 8 minutes each as well. And then we basically go to the committee members, followed by non-committee members who are invited to ask questions of the contributions, and then we get to debate it. Okay, so lots of stuff to remember there. We'll try and make sure we get. I go for it probably on the long way. I'm guessing, Eddie, because you've got your clock off, that you'll be timing.
That's
timing.
why it was actually hurting my skin.
Okay, fine. So, as long as everybody understands that, Councillor Fine and Cook, over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrett. Good evening, councillors, officers and any members of the public who may be watching. I'd like to thank Councillor Rowlands and Councillor Quinn for requesting this additional level of scrutiny to the decision taken by the Executive regarding ward councillor grants. It is a key decision and one that I never imagined I would need to ask my colleagues to support. Nevertheless, as you all know, we find ourselves in extremely challenging times when it comes to the finances of the Council. Recent reports have built up a picture of the Council finances which is incredibly concerning. We've identified that the financial sustainability of the Council is at risk, and it is absolutely imperative that councillors and officers work together to identify savings to the base budget. We have a duty to residents to identify and examine all spend, and believe me, no stone is being left unturned, and to reduce or remove spend that does not have wide impact on residents. Savings that are made in this financial year have a cumulative impact on future base budgets, and so the requirement on all executive members was to identify areas in which savings could be made quickly, but with relatively small impact on residents and the declared strategic intent of the Council. In essence, savings that are made quickly have the greatest impact when it comes to our efforts to secure the finances of Surrey Heath Borough Council. Ward councillor grants are provided to each councillor to spend supporting local causes. They do not support the financial sustainability of the Council or provide services that the Council would otherwise have to provide. Despite reviewing and updating the criteria for the grant scheme, we still find many applications do not support the Council in achieving its key strategic aims. Whilst the overall spend on each potential grant is relatively small, the maximum spend in any one grant is £500, with a total yearly spend per councillor of £1,000, that total in the base budget is £35,000. This isn't a small amount, and it cannot be considered to be insignificant. To compare with other potential savings, it could represent the cost of the post of an officer, or indeed 2 of our current revenue grants. It has to be seen in the light of other grant schemes that do impact on the most vulnerable in the borough, and to whom we've had to let know that we might not be able to support in the same capacity during the next financial year. Councillors need to be aware that if an amount is budgeted for in the base budget, even if it is not spent, it will only represent an in-year saving, whilst the amount remains in the base budget, it will not help us to achieve a sustainable budget. For the past few years, officers, and indeed myself, have needed to persuade many councillors to spend any of their grant. And this indicates to me that the value of the grant to many councillors, to residents and to organisations is lower than anticipated. The grant scheme was established in December 2020, so it is relatively new and certainly not in place long enough to become embedded in Surrey Heath culture. The fact that organisations are not guaranteed a ward grant year on year, and the relatively small sum of the ward councillor grant, means that it is unlikely to severely impact on organisations if it is withdrawn. They should remain sustainable without access to the grant. The decision was made quickly due to the urgent and pressing financial need of the Council, which I know this committee is fully aware of. However, I accept the argument that a short notice period would have been useful. During the call-in period, this has essentially acted as a notice period, as the scheme has remained open to councillors who have submitted applications, and these applications have been considered as they normally would. I've known many of the councillors serving Surrey Heath for years, and those that know me well know that I have worked to support my community for a very long time, many years prior to being elected. Suspending ward councillor grants is not something that I thought I would need to oversee. I believe in supporting grassroots organisations who are doing good work. I was elected in 2023, so I haven't always had ward councillor grants available to me. What I want to stress here is that as councillors, we must now work to a different model than one that simply hands out cash to organisations. There are many other ways that councillors may support organisations in their wards to become sustainable, to obtain funding, to have a thriving body of volunteers and to achieve their goals. Supporting organisations in ways other than financially builds community links, ensures that councillors know the third sector providers in their wards and are linked to the residents that use them. It also empowers organisations to support themselves, achieving sustainability, which is a key part of our strategy. I stated on the 5th of November that I presented this paper with the heaviest of hearts, and that is still the case today. But I do believe that suspending the ward councillor grants, although regrettable, is absolutely required. The need to make our financial sustainability the key priority for all councillors across all parties and none is something that is necessary, and the need to identify ways to do this that do not impact on most residents is essential. It is not an option to fail to recognise the situation we are in and the need to make difficult decisions to protect residents' interests in the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fine and Cook. Mr Stevens, are you prepared to say something?
Thank you, Chair. It's really difficult to follow Councillor Fine and Cook when she put it so eloquently. And I think the last words that she said, nobody savours the idea of having to cut the councillor grant scheme, and more widely, no one savours the idea of having to cut a lot of discretionary services or pare them back quite substantially. But that is the situation that we face. And I don't think that any of us as councillors or officers signed up to that, but there is a necessity for us to make substantial savings across the council to ensure that we remain viable. Anyone who has seen or discussed the recent budget reports will understand the enormity of the task that we have. The Q2 revenue budget reports that you have all seen identify that we have a deficit of £8.6 million this year, and we cannot sustain that level of reliance on reserves. We will very quickly burn through our reserves, and therefore we have to treat this with the utmost urgency. We have a transformation programme which the officers are running through at the moment, and we are developing that and fleshing out the concepts. There are 6 key themes within that. One of those is discretionary services and discretionary expenditure. And these grants sit very much within that category. We have to do all we possibly can to ensure that this council remains sustainable and viable into the next few years. Otherwise, we will cease to exist, or we will cease to be able to control our own expenditure. We want to get to the point where we have a sustainable council. We are just not there at the moment, and unfortunately, this is one of the uncomfortable decisions that we do have to make. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr Stevens. Did Mr Watson want to add anything else to that?
Thank you, Chair. No, I think the previous 2 speakers have summed up the financial position quite succinctly and accurately. It is not a great place to be, and I would echo that we are not the only council that will be having these sorts of discussions. There's those that have already issued a Section 114 notice. There's those that are probably closer to it than we are. But what we have to do is stop the use of our reserves. And you could say it's only 35,000. That multiplies up over the MTFP to getting towards 150,000, 140,000. It is something that then becomes significant around those things. And you have to start somewhere. And this is certainly a start on it. And as Mr Stevens pointed out, there will be bigger and more painful issues that will come to the fore in the next couple of years anyway. So all I can do is echo what they've said and thank them for doing my job for me almost.
Thank you, Mr Watson. Okay, so then we have the 2 call-in councillors. I think, well, actually, we'll go for the committee member first, if that's okay, Councillor Quinn? Unless, which one of you, because you both called it in, so I don't mind which one of you speaks first.
I did submit mine first, but I really don't mind.
Okay.
I don't know what the procedure.
Okay, right. So what we'll do is we'll do it because the committee member first, and then we'll come to you afterwards. Okay, Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. I think what is revealing is that basically the situation that the council is in at the moment is that on Band D, a 50p increase in council tax would actually likely, in 4 years, clear the deficit. Now, how you achieve that or what could happen is very important. But what we're talking about is going through a procedure that would cut one of the important features of the democratic process that operates within this council. I mean, what was missed out in the analysis was that when the new councillors arrived, it was 1,500. Without much discussion, 500 was withdrawn immediately. And then, of course, there was a look at the other 1,000, which is what we're talking about at the moment. So a decision was made to, as we pointed out, to reduce the direct financial relationship the councillors have with their wards, in each of our wards, and how we operate. So that is a crucial role. There's also the central question of whether this amount of money, in relation to the type of figures related to the deficit that Bob was talking about, is that will it make a financial difference? Well, it is part of a whole process of expenditures, etc. It may fit into there. But something is so important and directly related to the democratic operation of this council, we are sacrificing that in the light of this acute deficit. And I feel really not making any process towards rectifying the problem we have. So a wide gap. How many 40,000s are we going to need to reach the putative figure of 4 or 5 million? That's the real question. And how much good would that actually do going through this process? So the feeling I think we have is we're taking on a hair shirt, possibly unnecessary, in order to achieve this particular result. We believe that this grant is a vital link, and certainly in our ward and other wards in the council, to the people we serve to represent, because it opens up the whole question of how local government in Surrey Heath actually operates. This is something that we as councillors have to work with voluntary groups and to be actively active in our particular council. And as I say, I believe it's an unnecessary process. Certainly I take what we've heard about the financial difficulties the council is in. I do regard it as being realistic, but I don't feel the sacrifice of one of the basic operations of individual councillors would actually make any fundamental achievement towards rectifying the problem we face as far as the deficit is concerned. I noted the comments that have been made and I just don't think that some of the arguments in favour of doing it principally stack up, because it is adopting a series of categories in the hope that by changing them, we're somehow going to rectify the problem. And we've heard that in the future, other things will be put into the category of redeeming the deficit we have, but that's in the future. But this figure of 1,000 per councillor doesn't seem to me a significant part of the process of rectifying the problem that the council actually faces at the moment, as far as its deficit is concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. Councillor Quinn.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Performance of Finance Scrutiny Committee. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening on the decision to pause ward councillor grants. I'd like to thank Councillor Finan-Cook for her thoughtful response, and obviously my colleague, Councillor Rowlands, for outlining some of the points that I'm going to be making. Firstly, I recognise the immense financial challenges that our council faces and the necessity of making decisions that will secure sustainable budgets. My purpose in calling in this decision is not to undermine that effort, but it's to ensure we've applied robust scrutiny to a change which has wide-reaching implications both for us as councillors and the communities we serve. Ward councillor grants are a critical mechanism for addressing localised needs and building a direct connection between councillors and the residents we represent. These grants allow us to respond quickly and meaningfully, ensuring that even small amounts of funding can create tangible benefits for our communities. In my own ward of St Michael's, I've had the privilege of supporting projects that exemplify this impact. These include £500 for the Camberley Men's Shed to install a defibrillator at the Pavilion in the London Road Recreation Ground, £500 for Home Start Surrey Heath to establish a parents and babies support group at the Camberley Baptist Church, and funding for Citizens Advice to purchase a Chromebook, allowing them to provide vital remote services. These examples are mirrored across the borough, with grants being used to support everything from Christmas events to equipment for vulnerable groups. Collectively, the £35,000 allocated through this scheme each year represents far more than its monetary value. It's a cornerstone of trust and collaboration between the council and our communities. The availability of this grant encourages councillors to get to know the organisations in their ward better, and vice versa. The decision to pause this scheme with immediate effect is concerning for me for several reasons. Firstly, unlike the case with the community and emergency food and fuel grant schemes, no notice period was provided. These grants were due to be paused immediately without clear notice to organisations and councillors. Any organisations that were mid-application and liaising with their borough councillor before applying were left uncertain about whether they could proceed, and existing applications that hadn't been processed would be left in the lurch. These are often smaller groups with limited resources for whom such uncertainty could have outsized consequences. Sudden changes like this not only risk their projects, but also trust in our processes and applying for future grants from the council. Second, the lack of prior consultation with councillors raised questions for me about fairness and transparency. Whilst I fully understand and appreciate the financial context, I believe changes to such a widely valued programme should have been preceded by clear communication and a collaborative approach. It's worth noting, however, that the call-in period has in effect provided a notice period, and that partially addresses my fairness concern. Let me also clarify that my call-in was never intended to be a personal criticism of any member of the executive, including the portfolio holder. My concern about fairness was not about individuals, but about the process and ensuring that all councillors, and by extension, all wards and their residents, were treated equally. I'm deeply grateful for the work the portfolio holder and the executive do in navigating these difficult decisions and the difficult decisions they'll have to make in the future. I'm raising these points simply to uphold the principles of good governance and fairness. More broadly, the principle of fairness is about more than ensuring councillors have an equal opportunity to allocate their grants. It's about giving notice to all affected parties, councillors, organisations and residents, so that they have time to adapt to changes. Fairness and transparency are cornerstones of good governance, and by ensuring these principles are upheld, we protect the trust and confidence of the communities we serve. I appreciate the financial pressures outlined in the report and the need to find savings across all areas of council operations. However, as the report itself acknowledges, the grant's impact on local organisations is substantial, and their symbolic value as a link between councillors and communities is irreplaceable. I believe there's still an opportunity to balance financial responsibility with community trust by taking a more measured approach to these changes. To that end, I respectfully urge this committee to consider one of two actions: either retaining ward councillor grants for the current financial year to allow allocated funds to be used in full by the ward councillors who haven't used them yet, or alternatively to implement a longer and clear notice period of the withdrawal of these grants for both residents, organisations and councillors. By doing so, we can fulfil our current commitments while demonstrating we still value fairness and transparency. This is not just about £35,000, it's about the message we send to our communities and how we uphold our roles as representatives. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. So, the next part of the procedure is committee members followed by non-committee members will be invited to ask questions of the contributing parties. Obviously, Councillor Finan-Cook and the other officers, plus Councillor Quinn and Councillor Rowlands. So, has anyone got any questions specifically? Oh, sorry, I was looking down. I was looking, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask Councillor Rowlands a question about his assertion that a 50p increase in Band D council tax could address the deficit completely. The deficit is £8.6 million per year. The council currently collects about £9 million per year in council tax. So wouldn't council tax have to effectively double to cover the deficit? Thank you.
Can I answer that, Chair? Well, Bob will actually correct me, but I understand that 50 on Band D, an increase of 50p per week would actually, at the present, cover the deficit. That's what I mean. Bob may correct me on that.
Chair, sorry. It does say in the procedure at the bottom, points of clarification may be asked of any supporting officers at any relevant point. Could I ask...
The one step ahead of you.
All right, cool.
Mr Watson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. As Councillor Rowlands suggests, 50p a week on the Band D is equivalent to a 10% increase across the council. That would generate, in terms of an annual £1 million. So, unfortunately, as he states, it wouldn't clear the deficit. It would have to be that amount year on year, which would then eventually increase to the point where the deficit is ameliorated. It would obviously support our reserves position. The real concern is that we can't increase our council tax currently by 10% a year without the need to go into a referendum. The government at this point in time has reiterated the previous rules that council tax rises are capped for district councils at below 3% before the referendum is required. To have a referendum is likely to cost the council potentially between £200,000 and £300,000 as well, which obviously would be the first charge against any amount of council tax raised. So, in theory, any increase in the council tax over and above what we're placing in the budget assumptions would go to close the deficit. But the amount that's needed, I would suggest, is certainly more than the 50p a week, which would only give us, say, £1 million, unless you continue it on year. And that would eventually bring us to a point where, if nothing else changes, that deficit would gradually disappear. It will give us more time using the reserves that we have, but it wouldn't solve the problem. It would need to be a larger figure based on what the budget we can work out. So, unfortunately, we can't do it either without getting the government to agree to removing the referendum limit.
Bear with me 1 second. Good point. Thank you. Thank you, Eddie, as always. Can we do this in order of those that spoke? So have you got any questions? Because we are going to debate this afterwards, but this is just purely questions. So have you got a question, any questions for Councillor Finan-Cook? No? Okay. Mr Stevens? You almost got away with that. Councillor Noble.
Thank you. Can I just confirm that the role of the council is to provide statutory services and discretionary services that are nice to have?
Indeed, you are right, Councillor Noble, that is the case. It very much in the phraseology, discretionary services are exactly that. The statutory ones are the ones which, whichever tier of local government they apply to, are obligated to provide in some way, shape or form.
Thank you. Is it Councillor Whitcroft?
Thank you. And I apologise because I probably should have given notice of this question. I'm not trying to catch anybody out. But can anyone tell me when this councillor community grant scheme was first introduced? I'm sorry?
Sorry, I don't have my microphone. December 2020. I was the portfolio holder in 2021, and I was there when we implemented it.
Fine, thank you. And we're going to debate later. Okay.
So anyone else have any questions of Mr Stevens? Any questions of Mr Watson? Any questions of Councillor Rowlands? You can't ask a question of yourself, Councillor Rowlands.
The county council, all the county councils in this area still have a substantial fund as we have it. And the county, as I understand, the county council has the same degree of financial deficit.
Okay, we need to stick to this particular point. Any questions of Councillor Quinn? Right, so that then takes us on to the call-in councillors will make concluding comments. Go on.
I think based on the procedure, you should now go to non-committee members to ask questions.
You are very sorry. Anybody could have asked a question. Sorry, so that's my fault. So anybody could have asked a question. Councillor Rice. Okay, Councillor Melvaganam.
Are we debating or asking questions?
No, we're asking questions of the contributors. Have you got a question for one of the contributors? No. Okay, so we will then take it on to the call-in councillors will make concluding comments. I'll go back to Councillor Rowlands. Have you got anything else to say?
Only that I think the operation of the grant system, it's not that long lived, as we've heard, is an important part of our operation and our relationship with the people who elected us. And as I said, it's a great shame that will be taken away as part of an effort, if you like, to bridge this dip we've actually fallen into at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Quinn.
My only final comments, Chair, would be to say that it's actually good to test our scrutiny procedures and for you and the rest of the committee to get used to calling in, because of course there are going to be difficult decisions down in the next couple of years, and we're going to want to make sure that they're robustly scrutinised.
I can speak from experience being on that side. They are certainly scrutinised. Okay, so that then takes us on to procedure point 7, which is the lead councillor representing the decision will make any final comments and will indicate if they are minded to agree with the action sought by the call-in councillors. Then we go to debate.
Thank you. You're quite right, Councillor Quinn. It is good to test the scrutiny procedure. And it is difficult being on this side, I have to say. So thank you all for your contributions and what you've said. And it doesn't fall on deaf ears. And I know that this is a painful one. It is difficult. There's going to be more difficult decisions to come. And this is just the beginning. So good scrutiny is a good thing. I just wanted to touch on a point that Councillor Rowlands made in terms of how important it is to have these grants in order to fulfil your role as a councillor. And I just wanted to challenge that really, because this council is 50 years old and we've only had this scheme in place since December 2020. So I'm sure we had over the years very many very successful councillors who fulfilled their roles well and supported their communities well and represented their residents well in that time. The intent of this grant is never to make it something that is relied upon by either councillors or the organisations that apply for it. It is, as Councillor Noble suggested earlier, a nice to have. And I would dearly love to be able to keep it, but I really do feel that now is the time where it has to go. I just also wanted to make the point that councillors are reminded frequently to spend their grant. And I think that Mrs. Lowe and myself both sent out reminders towards the end of the summer, perhaps the very beginning of September, asking you to make sure that you are encouraging applications. That happens on a regular basis. In terms of a notice period, I did say in what I said earlier on that perhaps we should have had a short notice period in the run-up to this, and I accept that. However, a notice period has now been given, and I think you accepted that. So I think we've reached a point of understanding there. And I don't really have anything further to add. I don't accept the call in, and I would like the committee to accept that the paper should be approved and should have been approved. Thank you.
Can I just ask one question, because it wasn't clear from this, and I should have asked you before, so the chair gets a slap on the wrist. The information within the paper highlights the grants that have already been awarded and those that are in progress. Since this paper has been generated, I'm pretty sure some of these have also been awarded. Do you know off the top of your head how many of the unawarded ones are still, how many left are unawarded?
I don't, but they still will go through the process. So they're not going to be removed from the process. They will be allowed to complete.
So the 3,690 that were on this paper that were already in progress are either already awarded or still in progress?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so following the procedure, item 8, committee members followed by non-committee members will then be invited to debate the called-in decision and decide on a course of action in accordance with paragraph 15, which I'm going to have to read probably. Okay, so so we've got, I think it was Councillor Malvaganam, Councillor Rates, I think it was Councillor Wilson, and then the two Kangs. I think it was Sabi Kang first and then Nirmal. Right. So it's like a double act. Okay, right, so let's go with Councillor Malvaganam first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. One thing I must say in advance, I'm actually with the executive when it comes to making savings. Absolutely no question about it. Council needs to make savings. We could have done it two ways. One is actually, we knew there was going to be some sort of a crunch every year from about a year or 2 years ago. We shouldn't have allowed this to even turn up in our MTFS and in our budget. That's history, that's done. What we should be doing, this is my, again, direct advice to the exec, is that you did give us notice, and on a personal basis, I told one of the recipients, please apply. They did apply, but it was falling just on the cusp, I believe, and that got rejected. What we should have done, in my opinion, is having given the notice, anything that's come in and it's valid should be seriously looked at and passed through. If not, what would happen now is the people who have been rejected are going to say, hey guys, you asked me to apply, we did, but you have rejected us. But that was all done within that period. That's something which I'd like the exec to take that away and maybe relook at some of those applications. That's all I request. But trust me, I'm on the exec side when it comes to savings. Thank you.
I just wanted clarity on this, because having been in your position, I think at this point, you're not actually allowed, but, yeah, point of clarification. So, we need, just to clarify, we need to debate now, the portfolio holders made it clear that they are not going to change their point of view, okay? So we need to decide now whether we, recommendations back to the executive to follow Councillor Quinn's ideas or any other recommendations we've got. That's what we're debating now. I'm happy if you wanted to respond, but yeah, okay. But the idea is we are debating on what we send to the executive as our suggestions, which then the executive debates and decides on whether they're going to go ahead anyway or take on any of our recommendations, okay? So I will let you speak.
Thank you, I appreciate that. It was just a point of clarification. Any application that was rejected will not have been because it was received at a particular time, and feedback will have been given precisely as to why that application was refused. So I would suggest you go back to your applicant and make sure that they received that feedback. I'll make sure on our side too, but it absolutely would not have been because of the timing.
Councillor Rakes, you were next, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm pained by this decision because I had something in mind for the community centre, and I had to tell them the other day, no, we're not going to be able to do it. But it seems to me absolutely invidious to be asking officers and staff and members of the council to make take much more pain than we're going to have to take in dropping this. So I support the executive's decision because frankly, when I hear people say they don't think this is going to have an impact, and they understand the position of the council, perhaps because of the time I've spent on the audit committee, etc. I really get that, but I can't believe that anybody really can't understand how serious this is. This is very serious, and I've got people I know in relation to the council who keep saying, "Oh no, something will turn up," and I just keep saying to them, "Woking. If you can explain to me how we avoid being woking, then I'm happy to see something different. But we have to be prepared to take something painful on our part if we're going to ask others to do the same, is my view."
Thank you, Councillor Rakes. Councillor Wilson, you were next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Rakes, and I would recommend that we go for, under section 5.1, we go for point 1, agree with the decision which has been called in which case it will be implemented with immediate effect. And I'd just like to add a few points to the debate about this. Firstly, we're in an emergency. The Council's in an emergency when it comes to financial sustainability. And as the Chief Executive said, we have to address this or we risk losing control. And as an airline pilot, I can tell you, you don't want to lose control of your flight path. You do anything to avoid that. And we have to take much more painful steps than this one. But we have to take this step because, for other reasons as well, because the spend on this is public money and we have to be careful how we use it, and it does not align with the council's strategy, which we've decided is the best, and the residents have decided is the best by electing us. So if we spend money on this, we can't spend it on important points of the council's strategy. And there's a cost to this scheme as well. There's a cost due to lack of coordination of the spend from across ward boundaries. We could be spending really quite inefficiently when we could be coordinating across ward boundaries and the council as a whole. It's inefficient to operate because it's very small applications, and applicants have to go through quite a long process for just £500. And it's inefficient because the council has to process unsuccessful claims as well, and there's no benefit at the end of that, just cost. So I agree with all the points that have been made, and once the debate reaches its conclusion, I'm happy to propose that we go with section 5.1, option 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let you speak. I just want to pick up on a point. £500 to some of these charities is not insignificant. I know from experience. I have spent every single penny of my money every single time I've had it available, and I could spend it 3 times over. Doesn't make my feelings any different because I know the exact position, but for some of these organisations, because they're not able to get other grant funding, this is actually, they shouldn't rely on it. I totally get that, but it is not an insignificant amount of money. I mean, I've given £250 to particular organisations, and it's like the best thing they've ever had. So I just wanted to pick up on that particular point.
It's true, but they've only had it for 4 years, so it's not like it's structural for them.
You're right. It wasn't there before, and when it was there, they made the most of it. But anyway, I'm going to go to Councillor Sabi Kang first because I haven't heard from you this evening.
Thank you. Just a few points. I do agree with this. It's not easy to make a decision and take money from somewhere and stop it once you've been giving it. And don't forget, December 2020, we were in COVID times. That was the time when they needed it. We gave it to them. So the decision was made to reversing it back 4 years, I don't think it's going to make much difference. Yes, it will to some, and no, it won't to others. And having been going around to all wards and dealing with the community, yes, they do need it, yet no, they don't need it. It's a balancing act. And yes, I do support it. It's not easy. We are going to make it, we had to make a harsh decision, but we have to make savings. Wrong decisions were made on purchasing wrong things. We still have to live with it. This is something we're trying to take away. Who knows, 4 years' time, we might reintroduce it. So that's one thing we need to look at. And I do agree with my fellow colleagues who've spoken earlier as well to support it. And I do think that everybody should support that. It's not an easy decision for you, Lisa, I understand, and for the officers as well. But I've seen it, I've gone out, I've explained it to them, and that we are here to support them, but not to take anything away from them, but to support them. And I've been into all wards, believe me. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Councillor Nermal-Kane.
I would like to say this is sort of diabolical. Why are we at this position? And reflecting back, we're in this position because there has been some really bad decisions made nationally, and talk about Liz Truss, but also from the previous administration. So we are trying to carry out our statutory duties, and these discretionary ones are the ones we are having to cut. We don't want to cut them. We know that this is painful to anyone who receives it, but we've got no choice. And this is going to be a small initial pebble. And I feel that there are going to be blocks being thrown in the pond later on, unless we have to start somewhere. So I would support 5.11.
Thank you, Councillor Kane. Does anybody else want to? Councillor Noble.
Thank you. I agree that we are going to have further scrutinies in due course. That's a good opportunity to understand the system. But I think as a council, we have a responsibility to ensure that we deliver our statutory services, and we've got a responsibility to ensure that we look after our council taxpayers' money and deliver those services to the best of our ability. We can't afford to buy all the sweets in the sweet shop, and sometimes we have to say, no, we can't do everything. And I think this is the first of those circumstances where we do have to say, no, we can't do everything that we want to do. We have to be financially responsible. We have to produce a balanced budget, and we have to make cuts in order to survive in the future and avoid being woking, for example. So I will be supporting 5.1.1 to take the decision as agreed.
Sorry, I wasn't listening. I'm just trying to figure out what I do next. Okay, any other questions? Right, we have a proposal which I am happy to follow, because I think reading the room, I think that's the route we're going, which is to initially to vote on 5.11, which is to agree with the decision which has been called in which case it will be implemented with immediate effect. I don't believe we need a proposer, having just spoken to Democratic Services, so I'm happy to suggest that's exactly what we do. So this is obviously committee members only that can vote. So I would, a show of hands at this stage is, I'll make it clear, so we're voting on to agree with the decision which has been called in which case it will be implemented with immediate effect. All those in favour, put your hand up. Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8, and me? 9, okay. Does it make 9?
It's everyone but Councillor Whitney.
Okay, right, okay. And all those against? Okay, and there was no abstention because that follows, yeah, okay. So with that in mind, I don't think we need to take this any further because the committee has agreed to, for the paper to be implemented with immediate effect. I would just like to say thank you to everybody for their time this evening, all their input. It wasn't an easy decision from all quarters, I would suspect. I know it wasn't an easy decision from Councillor Fine and Cook. I've been there, I've been in that position, I understand it. So thank you for everybody, thank you for debate. As Councillor Quinn alluded to, I'm sure this won't be the last time, and I might need to get on top of all the procedure points. So thank you, everybody. That isn't finished. We've got the work programme, but we won't go very long. Okay, so the work programme, you have it before you. We've had debates on this. Hang on, I need to get it open. I am currently happy with it. I don't think we need to move anything around. I've certainly spoken to Mr. Stevens and I've had a conversation with Mr. Scott. Unless anybody's got any burning desires to change anything or anything to it, we're all happy with the work programme. It does mean that the January meeting could be quite heavy. So we might look at a break or something for 5 or 10 minutes in between, but we'll see how it goes on the evening. With that in mind, thank everybody for your time this evening. Have a good rest of your evening.